This is a full story. Puppy wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. My name is Haley. My husband Rocky died in a car accident while taking his secretary on vacation to an island. When the police notified me to come, the secretary was kneeling beside my husband's body, calling out his name and crying terribly. However, I saw Rocky's soul floating in midair. Perhaps those who betray true hearts are hated even by death. The nearby officer, noticing my silence, awkwardly spoke, "Miss Haley." This single voice interrupted the secretary Serena's crying next to Rocky's body. I couldn't tell if Rocky truly loved Serena to the bone, but even though he lost his life, Serena only had minor scratches and bruises. But Rocky's love. I glanced at the ghostly figure of the man floating above, unable to suppress a click of my tongue. Rocky's love, it seems, changes more easily than a chameleon. When Serena turned her head and looked at me, her face showed clear surprise. Then she suddenly stood up, her face flushed red, and lunged at me. The soul of Rocky, seeing this scene, still tried to move between us, fearful that I would harm Serena. Unfortunately, he had no physical form and could only watch helplessly as Serena passed through him and lunged straight at me. "Serena, be careful." He furrowed his brow in warning, then glared at me fiercely, warning me with his eyes. "Haley, I warn you, do not harm Serena," as it had happened many times before. Unfortunately, it seemed that only I could hear him. When Serena tried to grab my shoulders, her face twisted in anger. The intruder was not friendly. I frowned and stepped back. Still, the officer beside her managed to support her, preventing her from falling to the ground. "Miss Serena, you need to calm down. Mr. Rocky's affairs should be handled by his wife, Miss Haley." Clearly, the officer had guessed the relationship between Rocky and Serena, emphasizing the word wife. Serena was momentarily stunned, her expression turning sinister. Like the terrifying ghost Jack feared, ugly and repulsive. "Officer, I want to report. Rocky's accident was definitely caused by her. It couldn't possibly be an accident." Serena screamed. The officer sighed. Seeing her outburst, I moved behind the officer. I didn't want to be hurt by this mad woman. By now, Rocky had moved to Serena's side, watching me with a cold stare. I couldn't read his expression, but guessed he was likely doubting me too. The officer seemed helpless. Seeing the officer about to speak, I interrupted him, glancing at Serena. "If there is no evidence, this is defamation, and I can sue you." Serena gritted her teeth, unable to control her anger. Finding it uninteresting, I kindly advised her. "I suggest you quickly sort out the things Rocky left you." I paused. After all, that is marital property between Rocky and me. Jack and I are the only heirs to Rocky's estate. "Miss Serena, do you think I might reclaim the money spent on you?" Serena, who had been continuously crying, suddenly stopped. The officer, seeing Serena calm down, quickly had a female officer assist her out. As Serena left the room, Rocky tried to follow. Unfortunately, just as he reached the door, he was pulled back by an invisible force. I sneered, thinking he deserved it. "Miss Haley, Mr. Rocky's affairs are now your responsibility," the officer who had brought me said. I assumed they had already investigated before coming to find me. Rocky's accident was indeed an accident, so they only asked me some routine questions about Rocky on the way and didn't say much. I had no interest in looking at Rocky's face, especially not the face from the accident. Blood and flesh were a mess, and I feared nightmares. After calling my assistant and lawyer to handle things, I prepared to leave. Since I came in a hurry, although I sent the nanny to pick up Jack from kindergarten, I still felt uneasy. Jack, who had never had his father around, was particularly clingy to me. I worried he wouldn't sleep without me. After completing the formalities and confirming the assistant would arrive soon, I went to the airport and caught the nearest flight. I confirmed. Rocky seemed unable to leave me. Looking at Rocky floating on top of the plane, I squinted. This could be interesting. As soon as I got off the plane, I received a video from the nanny. In the video, Jack, dressed in cute pajamas, with his black grape-like eyes blinking, refused to sleep and kept calling for mommy. Only when the nanny said mommy was watching from behind the camera did he sit up, reluctantly smiling at the camera. "Mommy, Jack wants to sleep with you. Will you come back?" Jack was 5 years old this year and starting kindergarten next year, yet his voice was still babyish, making my heart ache. I quickened my pace home. My assistant arranged a car for me, and I was home in less than an hour. The nanny was reading a picture book with Jack. Hearing my return, Jack quickly ran to the door to greet me. I hugged Jack, comforted him, and took him back to his room to help him sleep, reading him a story from the book. It took a while to get him to sleep. While caring for Jack, I glanced over and saw Rocky sitting on the windowsill of Jack's room, where the soft cushion was laid. Usually, he didn't show much affection for Jack, often not spending time with him. So during the time I was calming Jack, he never mentioned his father. I heard him mumbling. He wondered why Jack didn't look for his father. I found it laughable. Looking at Jack sleeping so obediently, I kissed him and returned to the master bedroom. I wasn't prepared for any games. I sat on the end of the bed and spoke up. Jack has been alive for 5 years now. How many times have you spent with him in these 5 years? Have you ever taken him to the amusement park or put him to sleep? What more do you want him to remember about you? Jack knows the family driver better than he knows you. I looked at him. I had been married to him for 10 years. He had been cheating on me with his secretary for 3 years. The translucent soul suddenly looked at me. The room was quiet for a long time. His face was full of astonishment, devoid of the usual Rocky boss demeanor. "You can see me." I didn't answer, just looked at him like he was a fool. Rocky sighed, sat in front of my vanity, and after confirming he couldn't see himself in the mirror, stared blankly for a few seconds. I scoffed and crossed my arms. Does Rocky even need to cling to me in death? After discovering Rocky's affair with Serena, I filed for divorce. But he disagreed, claiming he couldn't live without me and Jack, and various rejections followed. At the worst, I filed a lawsuit in court, but I lacked key evidence of his affair with Serena. Since Serena was his secretary, even with their frequent comings and goings together, no objections could be raised. After several attempts, I set it aside for the time being, but from another perspective. A non-existent ATM machine was quite good. No home, no trouble, and still money. So I started purchasing real estate under Jack's name. I continued to manage my career. I had to guard against Rocky's sudden divorce. But I didn't expect that before Rocky could file for divorce, he would die. Rocky had no brothers, and his parents had died years ago. This meant that the only heirs to Rocky's assets were Jack and me, protected by law as his wife and biological son. He truly was a great person. We didn't talk much all night. I went to bed quickly. The next morning, my assistant sent me the cremation certificate for Rocky's body, along with a video of Rocky being sent into the cremation furnace. From a distance, Rocky saw me watching something and walked over, seeing himself being pushed into the cremation furnace. "Aren't you the least bit sad?" His voice was muffled. Seeing my interest as I sipped my coffee, his brows were tightly furrowed. Not answering his question, I finished my coffee and went to Jack's room to wake him up. He needed to go to kindergarten. Not getting an answer, Rocky became frantic, continually approaching me and raising his voice in anger. "Haley." Jack, just waking up, didn't hear his annoying voice and smiled happily in my arms with sleepy eyes. "Mommy, I want to take lots of snacks to share with my friends today." During washing up, Jack couldn't help but dance around. I smiled, helping Jack find the snacks he wanted to take to school and pack them into his backpack. After sending Jack off and confirming things with my lawyer online, I went to Rocky's company. Rocky seemed to be angry and didn't react at all, sitting there with his arms crossed. Perhaps he was also anticipating a meeting with Serena later, but he would be disappointed. Men are often much less perceptive than women when it comes to certain things. For example, recognizing a woman's true nature. When I arrived at the company, we didn't see Serena. Rocky's other secretary, Bame, was already aware of the situation and had received a call from my lawyer. Understanding what I was there for, he kindly arranged a meeting for 2 p.m. Bame led me into Rocky's office. "Miss Haley, please sit here for a moment. I'll get the documents." After a brief hesitation, he opened a cabinet to reveal a hidden bedroom. "If you're feeling tired, you can rest here." The bedroom had a large bed, a basic wardrobe, and a bathtub. I frowned, thinking about what Rocky and Serena might have done there. I lost all interest in staying, or rather, this office might have seen some inappropriate activities. The more I thought about it, the more disgusted I felt. "This place is too dirty," I said, stepping back a bit and wiping my nose. "I'll just go with Bame to your office." Rocky, who had been quiet, couldn't help but fix his gaze on me intensely. I ignored his anger and signaled Bame to lead the way. Bame had no choice but to lead me. After reviewing some documents and consulting with an expert remotely, it was noon. Rocky knew what I was up to. As I followed Bame to the company cafeteria for lunch, Rocky followed behind, cursing. "You can't sell my shares, Haley, you bitch. These are all mine. What right do you have?" Rocky came from a modest background, and the company was built through his own hard work. He was a standout among his peers. Even at 20, he proposed to me, and we married at 23 because he wanted to provide a better life for me. But in the 7th year of our marriage, he cheated. Watching Bame get my lunch, I finally responded. "Now these shares are mine." I couldn't be bothered to explain further. Rocky was clearly stunned, his eyes reddening. "Haley, you'll never have peace." After lunch, a brief rest, and then the afternoon meeting. Before I reached the meeting room, I heard Serena's voice inside. I leaned against the door, glancing back at Rocky. His eyes flashed with expectation, which I found amusing. "Such a foolish man. Ladies and gentlemen," Serena's voice carried out. Rocky wanted to go in but kept scanning me. but I stayed outside. Since I didn't go in, Rockey couldn't go in either, and we both listened from outside. Boss Rockey has passed away. Serena's voice was fragmented. Fearing she might ruin my plans, I stopped being angry with Rockey, opened the door, and walked in. Secretary Serena, what a coincidence. At the sound of my voice, Serena, in a white chiffon dress, trembled. Hello, shareholders. I greeted the circle of shareholders without acknowledging her. Seeing Serena standing in front of my seat, I placed my bag in front of her and raised an eyebrow. Is there something else, Secretary Serena? Serena wasn't particularly clever, and she couldn't hide her intentions. Looking into her eyes, I could see she wanted to use Rockey's shares to gain more benefits for herself, just as she had been smug and provocative after her first hotel visit with Rockey 3 years ago. It was the same now. With just one glance, I knew she planned to join forces with the shareholders to trade Rockey's shares for her own gain. But Rockey was blind to this. He completely missed the scheming in Serena's eyes, although he did notice the timid glance Serena shot at Tony, another boss beside him. Just this glance made Rockey feel immense pain. He came to my side, trying to intimidate me with a murderous look. Haley, you better treat Serena well, or even if I go to hell, I'll drag you down with me. TCH. Hell. I ignored him and glanced at Tony's somewhat balding head. Serena's choice of partners was truly poor, but I understood Serena's situation. Among the shareholders present who didn't know about Serena and Rockey's affair, now Serena was like a hot potato, and anyone with a brain would stay away. So, looking at it this way, Tony, though balding, was lustful and wealthy. I squeezed Serena aside and pulled a chair over to sit down. Today, I'm here to discuss the future development of the company with everyone. I turned my head and had Bame explain Rockey's situation to the shareholders. Bame's expression was not pleasant, but he had no choice, so he stepped forward and reiterated the details of Rockey's situation. When discussing the accident, the shareholders' gazes towards Serena became more scrutinizing. In the early days of the company, Rockey couldn't afford a driver. If the accident were not somehow related to Serena, no one would believe it. But since only Serena and Rockey were in the car, and Serena insisted it was an accident and had nothing to do with her, the police had nothing to say. Even Tony's once sympathetic gaze towards Serena had turned cold. Serena bit her lip, her eyes red, her lashes trembling, looking pitiful. I tapped the table, dropping a bombshell. I'm not familiar with Rockey's company matters, so after consulting, I plan to sell Rockey's shares. I remember the contributions the shareholders have made to the company, so I will prioritize selling the shares to the shareholders. I took a stack of my assistant's business cards from my bag and handed them to Serena, smiling slightly. Please help distribute these business cards to each shareholder, Secretary Serena. Initially, Serena worried that Rockey might favor me, so she restrained herself. But after realizing that Rockey and I were truly estranged, she no longer hid her intentions and often flaunted the gifts Rockey had given her in front of me. Now, suddenly being given a task by me, Serena's mind went blank and 2 streams of clear tears rolled down her face. A beautiful woman weeping. Although Rockey was furious, he couldn't do anything about me. But Tony, the boss, stepped in to defend Serena. He waved his hand and smiled. Miss Haley, please show some leniency and don't make things difficult for Secretary Serena. Then he had his assistant take the business cards from Serena's hands. I raised an eyebrow indifferently. After seeing that each shareholder had received a card, I explained, I'm giving everyone 3 days to consider. After 3 days, I will contact someone to sell off this 55% of the shares. Saying this, I stood up to leave, but paused at the door and looked back at Serena. Secretary Serena, remember what I told you at the police station? I'll be coming for it, so you'd better get things in order. With that, I left, my high heels clicking as I walked away. That force pulled Rockey along, making him follow me step by step out of the company. In the car, Rockey sat beside me. Seeing that I was resolute about selling the shares and making things difficult for Serena, he finally gave up struggling. His voice softened. Haley, I know I've wronged you, but I feel like I've been decent to you. Even if I have to beg, let's sell the shares to Henry and not target Serena anymore. Henry was Rockey's initial partner. He was also a witness at my wedding with Rockey, but I didn't see him just now, only his assistant attended the meeting on his behalf. I looked down at the video sent by Jack's kindergarten teacher. In the video, Jack took out snacks from his bag and distributed them to his friends. The children excitedly gathered around Jack, forming a circle around him. They sang songs and clapped their hands. Jack was in the center, smiling with his eyes squinting into slits. He was so happy. Rockey didn't get a response from me and leaned in to see Jack's joyful face. He was about to say something but was choked up. He said nothing more, just repeatedly gazed at Jack's happy face on the phone. The driver's car stopped in front of the villa. As soon as I got out, I saw the assistant hurrying back. Since accompanying me to the island, the assistant had been extremely busy and now looked quite exhausted. Thinking about the stack of business cards I had just handed out, I felt a twinge of guilt. Year-end bonus doubled. I patted his shoulder and walked into the house. Hearing about the doubled bonus, the assistant's face brightened noticeably. He quickly went inside and brought out the paper cremation certificate and death certificate. I've already delivered these to the lawyer. They are handling the transfer procedures for you and the young master. I took a look and deliberately threw them onto the single sofa Rockey was sitting on. Thanks for your hard work during this time. I briefly explained today's events to him. Just then, the assistant's phone rang. He glanced at me, and after receiving a nod, answered the call on speaker. A male voice on the other end was slightly breathless. Tell Haley that I want the shares she has. The voice was inevitably a bit aged. It was Tony. I brought a cup of water to my lips. The timing and tone were telling. TSK. Serena had some nerve. I didn't agree immediately and had the driver prepare to pick up Jack. At the kindergarten entrance, there were already many parents waiting, and several luxury cars were parked. Jack's kindergarten is a private institution, so the social circle involved is not particularly elite. I greeted the parents I had met before while picking up Jack. A mother of one of Jack's classmates smiled and came over to me. Today I saw my son Weiwei eating the snacks Jack brought. He seemed to like them a lot. Could you please give me the link? Weiwei's mother smiled warmly. I quickly sent her the link. Weiwei's mother promptly called Weiwei's father. I tactfully stepped aside and watched the children interacting with their teachers inside the kindergarten. When Jack saw me, he waved and blew me a kiss with a beaming smile. Jack was always so well behaved. The teacher noticed Jack's distraction, smiled at me, and then took Jack back to the classroom. Rockey unusually walked over to me, glanced at the other parents waiting around, and asked with an unusual touch of guilt, "Did you always come alone to pick him up before?" I looked at him with a hint of annoyance. Wasn't Jack's father dead? Rockey was momentarily choked up. Originally, Rockey was already upset about my actions earlier in the day, and now this left him even more sullen, his face darker than seaweed. Seeing his dark expression, I felt elated. Having been in a relationship with Rockey for many years and married for a long time, I knew exactly how to hit him where it hurt. Although I usually avoided hurting him because I needed him as an ATM, things were different now. With no more concerns, I no longer felt the need to hold back. When school ended, Jack ran up to me, hugged my hand, and said, "Goodbye," to his teacher. Back in the car, Jack's little hand waved in the air as he recounted the day's events. Suddenly, Jack's eyes widened as he looked at me. "Mommy, today Chow Chow said everyone has a mommy and a daddy, but I only have a mommy. Why?" Jack's tone was merely curious, without any sense of grievance or confusion. I sighed in relief. From the moment Jack was born, I had prepared for this. So even though Rockey occasionally came back to see Jack, I was always unwilling to let him. Even if he did come, it was usually after Jack was asleep. Later, as Jack grew older and Rockey's parents passed away, he spent even less time with us, focusing more on Serena. Thus, Jack really had no impression of his father. Rockey, who was beside me, seemed to be waiting for how I would respond. Ignoring him, I hesitated for a moment and decided to tell Jack the truth. Unlike other children, Jack was somewhat mature and more understanding, so I preferred to interact with him as both a mother and a friend. I calmly described the entanglements between Rockey and me over the past decade. To be honest, when I spoke about discovering Rockey's affair, I couldn't maintain the calm I imagined. My eyes welled up. Everything in front of me blurred, and I saw Rockey reaching out to help wipe my tears. How laughable. I picked Jack up from his seat and held him in my arms, but Mommy has Jack, and with Jack, I'm no longer afraid. Jack knew about the rest of the situation too. Jack hugged my neck and cried for a long time. When the car stopped in the driveway at home, Jack finally let go of me, blinking his big, shiny eyes several times to hold back his tears. "Mommy, we only need one man in our house, and Jack will protect Mommy." His little face was so cute and pitiful that I couldn't help but smile, hugging him tightly. "Okay, Jack will protect Mommy from now on." After Jack went inside with the nanny, I stayed in the car for a while, staring blankly at the passenger seat. During the conversation with Jack, Rockey had listened throughout. Perhaps he had never considered how his actions would seem so cruel from another perspective, and he remained silent. Rockey's voice suddenly broke the silence, becoming somewhat annoying. I was only staying in the car because I wanted a moment alone, not to listen to his apologies or complaints. I pushed the door open and walked away, my high heels clicking as I left. Rockey didn't move, but was pulled along by an invisible force, following me. Thus, the third day arrived quickly. After dropping Jack off at kindergarten, I once again arrived at Rockey's company. Secretary Bain met me and took me straight to the meeting room. Before arriving, I had already understood the situation with the assistant while in the car. Although Rocky's company was doing well, over the past 3 days, the best offer came from Tony. After the last call, Tony called again, offering even better terms. Although Rockey knew my intentions, this time he didn't react with the same anger and resistance. Instead, he pleaded with me not to be so harsh on Serena before entering the meeting room. It seemed he really had developed feelings for Serena. Considering the message the assistant had just sent me, I didn't respond to Rockey and eagerly opened the meeting room door. I wondered if seeing everything inside the meeting room would make Rockey soft-hearted towards Serena. As the meeting room door slowly opened, the first thing I saw was Serena sitting next to Tony. Different from her usual innocent and demure appearance in front of Rockey, she was now dressed in a tight white blouse that subtly revealed the contours of her chest, and a black skirt so short it barely covered her thighs, making her look exceptionally seductive. Tony's hand rested lightly on her snow-white thigh. Interesting. It seems my guess was correct. The two of them indeed got entangled after the last meeting. Tony's initial phone call's heavy breathing was truly the aftermath of his conquest. Seeing me walk into the conference room in a casual chiffon dress, Serena raised her chin in a flaunting manner. I glanced at Rockey, who was fuming beside Serena. I was no longer surprised by Rockey's changing moods. After taking my seat, I looked around at the shareholders present. We've received numerous calls these days, and after consideration, I've decided to sell the shares to Tony. I handed over the contract drafted by the lawyer to Tony. Pleasure doing business. Tony examined the contract, signed it after confirming the terms, and smiled at me. Pleasure working with you, Ms. Haley. Rockey, defeated, lay motionless on the floor, his face ashen. Amidst the noise, I barely heard Rockey murmuring, "What did I do for such a woman?" But that was no longer my concern. Seeing Serena's satisfied expression, she unashamedly embraced Tony and kissed him. Tony, pleased with the beauty's affection, gestured to his assistant to produce a card. "I've estimated the costs Serena incurred. This should cover it." He winked at me. "If Ms. Haley ever needs anything, feel free to contact me." I ignored him. This was likely our last interaction. I took the card. Congratulations to Tony on winning the beauty. As I left the company, I glanced back. The skyscrapers loomed, and people flowed in and out endlessly. I felt a bit disoriented. It was almost like returning to my university days. Back then, a youthful Rockey promised to treat me well for a lifetime. But in the end, things changed. Seeing the assistant follow me closely, I couldn't help but laugh. "You've worked hard. I'll give you a few days off." The assistant looked surprised, then cautiously asked, "What about the year-end bonus? Am I really that much of a hard-nosed boss?" I tapped his head with my bag. "Ask about the bonus again, and it won't be doubled." The assistant quickly apologized. I later received news about Serena from a friend. Tony, despite his wealth, never kept idle people around. Serena's beauty and figure were initially captivating, but eventually, Tony grew tired. Serena quickly became a known figure in the social scene. Eventually, she fell ill and died in a small alley in winter, reportedly after being abused by a few thugs. Coincidentally, it was also the day Rockey left for good. Since seeing Serena's other side, Rockey became completely silent. Often, I'd forget he was still around, but I didn't care much, living my life freely. Happiness is what matters most. Years passed quickly. The now handsome Jack became an internet sensation with a college entrance photo. Driven by his interest in acting, Jack entered the entertainment industry after much thought. Jack was stubborn about this, refusing my help to find better scripts, choosing instead to start from small roles. Whether a minor monk or a leading man, Jack immersed himself in the details, working diligently and joyfully. The only issue was Jack's reduced visits home. In late summer, Jack returned from the set and asked if I wanted to join him on a variety show. It's a family-oriented, slow variety show. I haven't traveled with Mom in a long time, so I thought I'd take her along. Out there, Jack was a beloved star. In front of me, he was still the obedient and occasionally spoiled child. Worried I might refuse, Jack clung to my arm. "Mommy, fine." 3 days later, the filming crew arrived at the villa. "Ms. Haley, we're here to shoot the pilot," the assistant director said, adjusting his glasses nervously. Jack had briefed me, so I sat for the camera, answering many questions about Jack's childhood and adding some lively anecdotes. The recording went smoothly. The first stop of the show was an island. Being a slow variety show, there weren't many cameramen, allowing us to enjoy ourselves. Days passed, and we arrived at the final destination, Yunnan. Jack was assigned other tasks by the director, so I visited the Peacock Park. with lush greenery and beautiful scenery. Peacocks quickly surrounded me when they saw the food in my hand. When Jack returned, we had a barbecue by a rye lake under a starry sky. Jack's cheeks flushed, eyes glistening with tears. He said, "Mom, I've wanted to take you on a trip for a long time." His voice cracked with emotion. I hugged him, comforting him like I did when he was a child. "You've done so well, Jack." Jack rarely gave me cause for worry. He thought things through, considering pros and cons, and asked for my advice when unsure. Entering the entertainment industry was a long-considered decision. Clearly, he succeeded. Becoming a shining star, I felt proud and happy. As the show concluded, Jack continued with his acting career but took breaks after each film to spend time with me. Meanwhile, I handed over the company to professional managers and enjoyed life, shopping, gaming with friends, and traveling. Without a man, I still lived happily. Epilogue 2. After leaving Haley, I didn't fall into the inferno I had imagined. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in high school where I first met Haley. Not far in front of me, Haley wore her hair in a high ponytail, dressed in a simple school uniform, laughing and chatting with her friends. In my past life, I had tossed the ball forward, using the chance to retrieve it as an opportunity to meet her. She was wonderful. I gripped the ball tighter. I dared not approach her again. During those 2 high school years, I would occasionally glance at Haley. Without me, she did not lose her charm. On the contrary, she flourished without having to worry about my pathetic pride, and was admitted to the top university in the country before the college entrance exam. I found it amusing. She had actually accommodated me so much without me even knowing, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't keep up with her. In the end, I only managed to get into a university next door to hers. Gradually, the distance between us grew further. When she entered university, she undoubtedly became the campus beauty, and there were at least 7 or 8 suitors, all more outstanding than I had been. And I was like a worthless piece of trash stuck in a pit, unable to climb out. I met Serena again in my 6th year of working. The consequence of my academic failures was an extended graduation. Missing the best time to find a job, I struggled and ended up delivering takeout on an electric scooter. I received an order to deliver milk tea to a luxury residential area. My shabby electric scooter seemed out of place in this upscale neighborhood. After making the call, I heard a familiar voice. "Okay, I'll come get it." It was Serena. After a while, Serena appeared in a sexy silk nightgown and took the milk tea from me. No, Serena's family was poor. This house couldn't possibly be hers. I took a deep breath, and memories of Serena's intimate relationship with Tony from my past life resurfaced. So she was like this from the beginning. I had been blind. "What are you staring at, you smelly delivery guy?" Serena, no longer polite over the phone, raised a hand to block her chest. I had evidently kept my gaze fixed on her. Serena huffed, turning to leave. "I'm definitely giving you a bad review." I was disheartened. My mind was filled with every detail of being with Haley. How could I be so enchanted by such a person when I had already had the best? I slumped down onto the ground helplessly. My phone soon pinged. I looked down. It was a 1-star review from Serena. I bitterly smiled and opened Haley's blog page. Without needing to worry about my career and work, Haley had pursued her favorite path. In the latest video on her page, Haley stood at the podium, smiling gently, speaking confidently and gracefully. The end.